Hello, and welcome back to FM Corner. FM Corner is sponsored by Windy City Equipment. I want to thank them for the opportunity to continue to do this. Today, a very special guest, a friend of mine for a very long time, Brian Foster, the Senior Vice President of Paint Folks. And we're going to talk a little bit about his career, about the company, kind of what they do, and so on. Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to be on FM Corner today.
Well, thank you for having me, sir.
I appreciate it. Let's start as we always do. Kind of talk a little bit about your career. How did it start? What'd you do to begin with to get to where you are today?
Well, I got out of the military in 1997, and I bounced around from job to job trying to find myself, and finally landed in doing sales. I was actually selling cars. I was a used car salesman. No, anyway, but started selling cars, and I sold some vehicles to a gentleman who owned a national painting company, which I won't mention the name, but
Sure.
and he brought me on board. Interviewed with his whole ownership staff. There was 4 of them. It's the first time I ever had an interview like that with 4 different people in a room. But interviewed, came on board within a couple months. I went from being a regional sales guy to this vice president of sales. And that was pretty successful and got my foot wet in the whole facilities arena until the recession. And then the company sort of couldn't make it through the recession. And Mike Rose reached out to me and said, hey, let's start a painting company. Thus, Paint Folks was formed and born and been running ever since.
Well, that's great. That's a great story. And Mike Rose, there's several companies involved. You know, there's a pest group, Paint Folks, several that have known Mike for a very long time. So,
yeah, he reached out and said, "Hey, let's start a painting company. I already have the infrastructure. You got the talent to get off the ground." So we worked together. He marketed me, and now I go to the conferences and trade shows, and people look at me and go, "Hey, you're the paint guy." And I just smile and say, "Yeah, that's me."
And you do restaurants and retail both, right?
Correct. Restaurants, retail, hotels. We expanded out into the senior living arena.
Uh-huh.
We've picked up some gas stations recently. We're doing exteriors and interiors, some gas stations. Yeah, pretty much anything that's out there that is commercial type of property, we've worked with it.
That's exterior and interior both, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So what's your day-to-day role at Paint Folks consist of?
Well, primarily I'm business development. Okay, but when we first started Paint Folks, it was just me and this wonderful young lady named Paula Nino, who worked for Mike.
Mm-hmm.
She was my operations manager / assistant, and basically she did the things that I couldn't do. Like she put all the notes in the system on the work orders and stuff that I wasn't very strong at. And she took care of that part, and she did the billing, all the sales, and a lot of scheduling we did together. I did the sales mostly, and then she did the scheduling along with. I helped her out, and that's continued on. But now, I've been surrounded with a great team. I have an operations manager strictly for Paint Folks. We have 2 dispatchers, and they're responsible for getting all the work done, scheduling, start to finish, coordinating between our painters, coordinating between the customers on site and the facility managers, and it works really well.
That's good. And you having someone to do the notes or make sure all that's done over the last few years has become even more critical. 15 years ago, hey, Brian, this is Danny. Can you paint Ruby Tuesday in Reading, PA? Yeah, we'll be there. Okay, got it. How much? Okay, yeah. All right, thanks. Let me know when you're done. And that was kind of it. Then just go do it. And now with the change kind of in newer, more remote type facility managers and so on, and all the third party groups that are out there to CMMS, most of that work is done from the computer. The days of the phone calls and so on is less, unless something's really wrong or something. Everything's kind of done through the third party provider. And so that makes notes, updates, change orders, anything is much more critical today to, get that to the customer because that's how they look at it.
Yeah, and when you're a small business and you're working, hand to hand and handshake type business that you were just speaking about, that's not as important. But when you get a little bit bigger and you have multiple people working with inside the company, it's important that them notes are in there so somebody knows what somebody else did.
Sure.
And that became our company motto or lingo was if it's not in the notes, it didn't happen. So we preach that to everybody within the company. From the top down. If it's not in the notes, it didn't happen. So
Sure. No, that's great. That's great. And that's kind of the way facility managers, that's how they do their day. COVID, but when we went through COVID, it kind of shut a lot of people down from doing all the traveling and doing the things that they used to do, and they had to learn a new way and many times take on a lot more jobs because companies were cutting at the same time. And so it becomes critical for them to have that information where they can go to it and take a look at it at any point in time.
Correct.
There you go. What's the best part of your job? And then on the flip side, give me the worst part.
The best part of my job is meeting new people, making friends and meeting people. And, I've built some lifelong friendships, I believe, doing this. Been doing it on a national basis for 20 years. And something you and I discussed over dinner a few years ago when you said, I got a guy.
Yeah.
You have a lot more guys than I do, but I can still say that now. I have friends that say, hey, I need this done. I got a guy. I can help you out. And spreading that work out amongst these people that you meet and you build relationships with, I think is a great, just basic networking.
Sure.
That is probably the favorite part of my job. Besides closing a deal, I still get a big rush from closing a deal. But as soon as it's done, I need to find a new one. I got to get to the next one.
Sure.
So, biggest part, probably pain in my job is people not meeting expectations. And some of that can be that the expectations weren't set correctly at the beginning, and some of it could just be people are lazy and just don't have attention to detail. Because I just had a meeting this morning. It's funny that I told my team, I said, look, if you take care of the smaller things, you'll have no big things. Take care of the small stuff, and there'll never be any big stuff. But sometimes people get too focused on the big picture and don't realize that smaller things that need to be done for that big picture to come into view.
Sure. It's funny you say that. I was in Chicago last week and I did a presentation for a facility company, and one of the things I talked about was, hey, listen, mistakes happens every day. We make them on our side. The customer makes them. Everybody does. They happen. You could try everything in the world to cover every single base you have, and there will still be a mistake. The difference in that kind of mistake and mistakes that are made because there were 2 or 3 details that weren't followed up on, or someone didn't make that one phone call, to make sure that we're supposed to be there at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning and somebody's going to meet us there, or whatever it is. Something simple as that. That's that's not a mistake. That's an issue of not fulfilling what your responsibilities are.
Correct.
And that's
a lack of communication.
You're exactly right. That is a big difference.
That is a big difference.
Yeah, I mean,
and as you said, the mistakes are going to happen. And it's how you respond to that mistake. We're in the painting business, and a lot of our work, especially interior work, is done after hours.
Sure.
It's dark. The lighting is different during the day. So the painters go in and they put a coat of paint on the wall, and they'll take pictures and that while it's wet, and it looks fantastic. But the next morning, that manager of that restaurant walks in, or that retail store walks in, and the paint's dried, and oh look, there's a little spot that needs more coat, another coat of paint. Get our team right out there and get that fixed right away. Don't drag your feet and let it sit that way for 3 or 4 days, because then people become unhappy. Somebody else's boss sees it. And
Right.
that's where it blows into a big thing. So take care of that little problem right away, and you won't have any big problems.
And a lot of that is in what you just said, explaining that to the customer up front. When we're doing our painting at night, it's dark and it's hard to see. The next morning, when you come in and we've just left to go get some sleep or whatever, there could be spots that show up that you see. That's natural. That happens all the time. You call us, we'll come back out, we will take care of it. I remember at Ruby's when I was doing remodels all over the country, and we were taking down wallpaper and we were doing painting and so on, and restaurants were open, till 11 or 12, and then you had 5 or 6 hours to do your work, and here you go again. And I didn't realize this until maybe 10 or 15 stores in. Then I really became aware. But we would paint about half of the dining room and then leave. And then come back the next night, paint the other half. Or 2/3 of it, and then a private dining room, third, depending on the size of the restaurant. Well, people freaked out. General manager come in and call and go, hey, your painters suck. They only painted half the building and then they just left. And after about a few of them, I'm like, okay, I realize it now. I got to explain how it works. And it's not all night, everything's done. It's half of the restaurant, then there's another half, or a third and a third and a third, or whatever it may be, because their perception is walking through the door, painters left early. And they didn't. And so
Right.
sometimes it's just that communication, just like what you were talking about, to let people know and explain on the front end, okay, here comes your project and here's how it's going to work. And so when
Correct.
these things pop up, you call me because we've already talked about it and we'll take care of it and move on. Kind of help on the front end so they don't freak out, because that's
Right.
what happens.
And that's one thing that we've done to try to be a lot more successful with that thing is that we have our painters show up at least 45 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes prior to their going to start time. And they walk the job with the manager on duty, and they explain what their plan of attack is to do. If it's a multi-night project, they'll tell them we're going to get to this point, we'll stop here, we'll clean everything up, and then we'll come back the following night. If you have any issues, call the office in the morning, and they'll make notes of it and get in touch with us. Like you said, they get done working at night. The last thing they want to do is wait around. So they'll go back to the hotel or back to their houses and catch a nap and get some rest, or get something to eat, and then they'll come back to work.
Sure.
That's a thing about I having my career. When I was in the military, I worked night shift before. I've been on that crazy 12-hour shift, 3 on, 3 off, 2 on, 2 off. You don't know what days what. You're changing shifts every 14 days, and it takes a toll on you when you're
Sure.
working like that. And
Sure.
it's hard for, I think, people who have a steady 9 to 5 job to realize or understand how much difference there is from people who were changing shifts all the time. So
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. But again, communication's the key. That's the
exactly.
part. Explain what you're doing, how's it work, and then if something does happen, get on it quick. Don't let it fester. Don't give the manager the opportunity to get on the horn and tell 30 people, hey, watch out for this, because here you go.
Stay ahead of it.
There you go. The skill set of a team is always important. What skill set does one need to have to be successful on your team? What's
It's
important?
fun. We just talked about it. First of all, the biggest skill set is communication. Able to communicate what's going on and setting expectations and following through. And follow up is a big thing too. If you tell me I'm going to have, I'll have a quote to you by Thursday, have the quote to me by Thursday. You
Mhm.
know, if you don't have the quote to me by Thursday, at least explain to me why you can't have it to me on Thursday. Because, like, within our business, you're passing information on to many different people, and people are relying on you to deliver on what you tell them. So, if I tell a customer I'm gonna have a quote to you by Friday, and for some reason I can't make it on Friday, I need to update them and say, hey, I run into an issue, so on and so forth. This is what happens. But and then again, sometimes that communication doesn't happen for one reason or another. We had a painter the other night, truck broke down.
Mhm.
Okay, so he was out in the middle of remote nowhere, had no cell phone signal, couldn't let anybody know his truck broke down. We didn't find out till the next day when the customer said, "Hey, nobody showed up last night." And, well, what's going on? Now we're all angry, but then we find out, oh,
Sure.
the truck broke down. He had no so you can explain that after the fact, but
Sure.
those kind of situations happen. But when you had the opportunity, just make that communication.
Sure. You got to let people know. And again, if you're the one that sets, if I say, Brian, when are you going to have a quote for me? And you tell me Friday, okay. You pick the date. I didn't. So, okay,
Right.
Friday, I'm ready, And I'd go the other way sometimes, like, when do you want it? Or when do you need something from me? Well, we need it by Thursday. Okay, well, I'm going to do my best to get it to you by Wednesday. I'm going to try to beat that date where my day. But you have to be careful now because, and we talked about this a week or so ago, was supposed you get boxed in. Customers like, you'll have it to me by Thursday, right? Thursday morning, you'll have it to me, right? Right? And you're thinking, well, I don't know if I can make that happen, but people will get boxed in because, and I was that customer at Ruby's, hey, you going to have it to me, right? 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 And sooner or later, so I'll shut up, they'll say, yeah, I'll have it to you. And then they won't because they couldn't, and you don't
Right.
want that either because, you know. So again, it's kind of setting a time that you think you can make and you're pretty sure, and will also give you a chance maybe even to beat it.
Right.
Then you're great because holy cow, I'm waiting Thursday morning. I got it Wednesday night at 5 o'clock. How good is that? You know,
There's that old saying, what is it? Under promise and over
over
deliver.
deliver.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're active in several organizations, RIFMA, ConX, more than that, I'm sure. Kind of what value do these organizations have for you, for your company, and also for you personally?
Personally, let me go with a company first. Let me start with the company. So for the company, having these relationships and the networking builds your business. When you get an opportunity to see people face to face and spend time with them, outside of that, having a cocktail or a bite of food or something,
Hmm.
you get to know people better. Okay, and people like to work with people they trust. And you can build that trust in that point, which that helps build the relationship, which helps build the business relationship because like we said, if we have some kind of issue or something happens that wasn't planned, because you've built that relationship and that trust is there, your customer knows that you're going to take care of it, and I know that I'm going to get it taken care of for them. Um, on a personal level, I was saying earlier, it's just the numerous amount of people that I've met and built relationships with and been able to spend time and learn about their families, like coach, and
Sure.
and meeting them and getting to experience that with them. I've got like relationships where I have one guy. He's been in a couple different jobs, but everywhere he went, he takes me along to be his painter, and he's getting ready to retire. And part of his retirement plan is he's going to sell his house and buy a camper, and he's going to drive around the country, and he's going to visit all the people that he's made friends with. He's got a lot of friends, and he told me, so you stop by here. He's going to park the camper in my front yard. And I said, well, you're going to have to talk to my wife about that. But my wife met him, had dinner with him. She loves him to death. So I wouldn't be surprised if once he retires, his camper's not in my front yard for a weekend or something.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Well, I think, and again, I've learned a ton from RIFMA. Is really about the only one I ever went to, but learned a ton. And as you said, I met a lot of folks that are lifelong friends. And some of those people I never did a nickel's worth of business with. Not a nickel. I mean, we didn't. We're just friends. And we learn, over time we met, we had drinks together, we hung out, and you just forged a friendship. And if you were to need something There's a whole list of people that you could pick up the phone and make a phone call to and say, I need your help.
Yep.
And vice versa, who could call me or you and say, hey, I need your help. And whether that's on a business side or personal side, those people would be there. I think that's the kind of key. When I, at RIFMA there in Vegas, which was my last one in retiring, had a few folks come up and say, hey, you may not remember this. 6 years ago, I joined RIFMA and you were my mentor. And I'm like, sometimes I did, and sometimes I went, no, I didn't. I forgot, And you helped me or whatever, or we met, we had a drink at the bar one night at such and such, well, that's a 500 people. And, while we were there, I asked questions about this and you tried to help me. And it meant a lot to those people, which means it meant a lot to me, And like I used Mike's example at my farewell speech of a time he helped me when I was between jobs. And nobody knew that. I mean, you might have known it, but a few people knew. But most people had no idea, no clue, But I wanted to recognize that because I thought that was huge. It was something, that people did, a person did, which wasn't called for, wasn't asked for, wasn't to gain business or any of that. It was someone helping someone else, and that makes a huge difference. Huge difference.
It does. And like when I started coming to the conferences, like my first conference, I still remember when I was with the other company, I had to go down to Orlando, and RIFMA was there at the Gaylord.
Yep.
And RIFMA ended, and there was no sense in me flying back home because Specs was starting later on that week. So I ended up spending 2 weeks in Orlando. And, some people took me under their wings. They knew I was new and they knew I was staying. Some other people were staying too. Hey, let's go have dinner, or, let's get together and do this tomorrow. And, it made the trip a little bit better and made me less nervous. And then, as I continued to go to the shows, spending time with people like you and Jack from Roto-Rooter,
Sure.
Gordon, Anna G when she was working. I remember Anna G and there was 5 of them across the booth from us. Robbie, and there's a couple others. They were with one company and they were across the booth from where our booth was. And we got conversations, and we were like, "How do you women walk in those high heels every day?" I said, "I don't think I could do it." And one of them said, "Here, put it." And the next thing you know, I'm standing in the middle of the aisle with high heels on, trying to walk in. I never did it again. My ankles aren't made for that. But big respect then for women in high heels, because But
Sure.
it's just those little interactions that built the relationships and also taught me how to how to respond and treat with people.
Sure.
And, treat everybody with dignity and respect, and you'll get the same in return.
Absolutely. You get back what you give. Exactly. Give me something in business that maybe early in your career you weren't great at, but you've worked really hard at, and you're either great at it or you are 10 times better than you used to be on it. Something.
Communication. When I first got out of the military, my communication style was just direct and in your face, and speak what's on my mind. And didn't realize that sometimes when you did that, you put people off or you hurt people's feelings, or you know, sometimes a direct thing in the military. It's great. That's how it works. You're trained to be that way.
Sure.
In the civilian sector, it doesn't work as much. And that took me a long time to make the adjustment on. I think I'm far better than I was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, but I'm improving every day on that. And it's just a matter of, how you talk to people. And I think that's the biggest thing that has changed in my business life.
Sure. I think for me, one of the things when I was early in management was people would come in my office and go, "Okay, I got this problem. What do you want me to do?" And my answer would be, "Okay, do blah, 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 do this." immediately because I thought that's what they wanted. And over time, I really had to learn don't answer. Don't answer that. No. Oh, okay. Well, what's your plan? What are you planning on doing? What are you thinking about doing? You know, and put the question back in their court. And so they think and they talk and they sometimes, as the more they talk, the more they'll figure it out all by themselves. And you didn't do anything besides ask a lot of questions. And they walk out of that room feeling 200% better than if they did when, okay, I walked in Danny's office and asked him what to do, and he told me, and, you know, probably thinks I'm dumb, I don't have the answer myself or something. And that wasn't it. I thought by answering the question or giving them quick direction, I was helping them out. Turns out I really wasn't. You know, I was kind of holding them back, and I wasn't pushing them to learn how to figure out the answer, you know, which once upon a time I did. You're not born with it. You figure it out, or you make enough mistakes that that's the other way they'll teach you, you know, how to do it. But
it's funny that you say that because my first customer when we started paying folks was Raising Cane's Chicken Finger Restaurants.
mm-hmm.
And the director of facilities at the time was a gentleman named Sean Bishop.
Mm-hmm.
And Sean was a direct guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he I like to laugh because he set me up one time. He sent me pictures of a paint job that was done. And he said, Brian, this paint job just got done in one of our restaurants. Didn't tell me the restaurant. No. He said, we just got done in one of these restaurants. And he said, what do you think the issue is? So I looked at the pictures and, you know, I wrote up a whole email and I said, I believe this is what happened. And he goes, well, good, because you guys just painted that about 3 weeks ago. I need you to go fix it. Okay, so we're going to get out there and get it fixed. I actually flew down and was in Baton Rouge. I flew down and met with the restaurant manager, and we got it all fixed. But the big thing was, you know, the grease from the chicken and stuff like that. They didn't get it all the way cleaned off, so the paint wasn't able to stick. Right. So we made sure we cleaned it really well. But he did a follow-up after that. He said, Brian, did that situation get fixed? I said, yeah. He goes, all right, I need you to send me an email. What is your plan to make sure this doesn't happen again? And he did that on multiple different occasions. And like when I had meetings with him down at his corporate office, he'd go, okay, what's your plan for this? And how are you going to make sure that this doesn't happen or this doesn't happen? And he made me think. And that enabled me to be better at my job because I took what I learned from him and started applying it to all my customers. Mm-hmm. You know, what am I going to do to make sure we had a situation here? What am I going to make sure that doesn't happen again? And now I try to pass that on to my team. You know, and as we said earlier in this conversation, mistakes are going to happen. And how you take care of them are the thing. But how do you prevent that same mistake from happening again? Because a different mistake is fine. But making the same mistake over and over again,
sure, that
shows not very professional.
Yeah, you're not listening. Someone's not listening, you know, to the customer. And I always thought too one of the important parts is put yourself in the customer spot. You know, if you're the facility manager, okay, and maybe Sean did all that on his own. Maybe he's like, I need a report from Brian to tell me how it's not going to happen anymore because my boss is going to ask me, and that's coming. So I'm going to go ahead and get it and get the information and so on because it's coming from someone above. Because listening to you, when you said that question, I'm like, I've been down that road. You know, not only am I communicating back and forth with you, but someone above me is going to have questions. How did it happen? Why did it happen? What are you doing about it to make sure it doesn't? And I got to have the answer to all those.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's not even me. It's someone above who wants to know, you know, what are you doing?
We all answer somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Describe your leadership style, Ron. And maybe it's evolved over time.
It has evolved over time. Like I said, coming out of the military, I was very direct. I started working in casual dining restaurants. I worked for Red Lobster as a manager for a while. I worked in Applebee's for a manager as a while. And, you know, working in that type of atmosphere, you know, it gets busy during a dinner rush or lunch rush, you know, and you're doing a $2,000 hour, you know, every table's full. You're on a 35, 45-minute wait. And you're just trying to get things done. And I have Applebee's did a personality thing, so I'm a high D type of individual,
Yeah.
and I'm just like getting things done, getting things good results, results, results. So to do that with, and that's my career, but the majority of my staff is all part timers, college kids, high school kids. This isn't their life. They're just trying to make a couple bucks to go party with their friends or hang out later. So for me to beat them up, that was the biggest learning period for me to adjust my leadership style. And now, taking what we just discussed about what Sean Bishop taught me and the people I have now, it's basically just trying to communicate, like you said, get people to think and figure out solutions, instead of me figuring out the solution for them.
Yeah.
And I used to have a tendency. You came in and said, "Hey, somebody walked in my office and said, Brian, I need help with this," and I would just take it and do it and fix it and hand it back to them. Okay,
Yeah.
but that doesn't help anybody, because then they're going back, come back to you again, and next thing you know, you're doing that for all the time. And what are you paying them for? So,
Yeah.
to get them to grow and to learn how to do those kind of things, that's probably where my leadership style is right now.
Our styles mirror almost the same. I did the big test as well, and I can remember the guy going, "Hey, I'm not really sure I'll tell you this, but I never had a human being as far left on the D as you are. My paper doesn't even go that far to put how dominant you really are." And I'm like, "Okay, think we ought to work on it?" And I said, "Yeah, probably. We probably should work on it, and recognizing and understanding that, and then you go to work on it to, are you going to go from the left side of the pendulum all the way to the right? Probably not. What you're trying to do is get closer to the middle.
Right.
Over time, get closer to the middle, recognize what you need to work on, and then work on it. So,
Yeah. And when I was learning that process, I actually, my district manager, we're sitting there having lunch one day, and I said, you keep referring that I'm a high D, and this is what you get from me. I said, what's the you got a high D, S, I, what's the thing? He goes, let me explain it to you. He says, you got four managers, and you got one of each alphabet. He goes, you're the D, such and such is the I, and then you got an S and a C. He said, let's pretend the restaurant's on fire on the middle of a Friday night rush. He said, your C, your person who's a C, is calculating. So they're going to have a pad of paper and they're writing down all the damage and what's going to need to be fixed. Okay. Your S is a steady person. They're telling everybody it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. The I, influential, is trying to get people to move out to the exits, go ahead and get out, even get the S and the C in line to get out of the building, get everybody out safe. He goes, and you're the D. He goes, you're just grabbing people and throwing them out the window. I said, all right, I got that. I understand that now.
understand it. That's how it works. That's great. And you need a little bit of it. My boss at Ruby's for many years was a heavy I. He calculated and thought about everything. I'm total opposite. Here's what I think. Da da da. Say yes, so I can go do it. Well, no. How about this? And let me think about it. I don't want to think about it. I want to go. I'm old school. Let me go down the road. If the road's wrong, I'll turn around and come back and I'll start again. But go. He was the opposite of go. Let me think about it. Let me make sure I've got all the, T's crossed and I've got all this, and let me go through it. But at the end of the day, those two played well because he understood my need for speed and I understood his need to make sure it was totally in the box before we went, and we managed through that. But we were the complete opposite, and we worked together 20 years. I worked for him, but 20 years. It's amazing. But you need all four. You really do. At the end of the day. What's your go-to saying, Brian? You have on your desk, taped on your wall, whatever, when kind of make sure you keep moving forward every day?
I have a couple depending on the situation or the mood I'm in. Um, One of them was taught to me when I was in the restaurant manager, trying to take care of everything. My district manager said, stick your arms out to your side. All right, I'm sitting there like this. He goes, fix what you can touch. Okay, that's pretty good. But The one that really sticks with me and that I try to live by is that there's a reason the rear view mirror is smaller than the windshield. Okay, because you shouldn't be looking back. You should always be looking forward.
Great.
And that's something that I try to live with. Yeah, things happen in the back, and like you said earlier, mistakes happen, and this happens, that happens, but you can't dwell on that because you'll never keep moving forward. You'll become stagnant because you're worried about what happens behind you. Same philosophy is, I think it's the same philosophy of the spilled milk theory.
Yeah,
You know, you spill the milk, you can't cry about the spilled milk. You got to clean it up and keep moving forward. Go buy another gallon of milk. So,
sure, sure. Mine's very similar to yours. Is be better today. Take every day and start all over, no matter what. And you're in facilities. You will never in your life do anything for restaurants fast enough, quick enough, cheap enough. You won't. That's just how it works. You know. But you're trying to win more than you lose, and you'll make some bad decisions and so on. But every page and every day starts all over. And all my goal is to be a little better today than I was the day before. If you keep doing that,
I
making
like
little incremental, things that don't worry, and it ties into looking backward. What happened yesterday is yesterday. Okay, I got all that. I'm gonna start all over today, and my goal is to do better today. You know,
that's it. I
and
agree 100%.
my last question, kind of, where do you think paint folks will be in the next 5 years, and what are the changes in the industry that may affect that, one way or the other?
When you sent me these questions, I looked at that one and I thought about it for a long time because there's so many changes coming in the industry right now. There's paint that now dries in 15 minutes. AI has become a big factor in. I saw a video where in new construction, there's a hotel hallway with new construction, and there's this gigantic robot that they got 5 gallons of paint underneath the robot, and he's programmed to go down that hotel hallway and paint everything. Bam! And it's different colors. The wainscot's one color and the upper top's another color, and bam, he just goes through and does it. And it does it 3 times faster than 2 men could do it.
Sure,
That was amazing to me, and with the robots coming out, and just wondering, how much not just painting, but all the trades will be affected
sure, right,
from here now. We I was growing up, to go to the movies in the 1980s, and you saw, was it Back to the Future with the
right,
hoverboard and the flying cars and all that kind of stuff, and that's never. There's hoverboards now, and they're there. So. Um, it'd be interesting to see where it's at 5 years. I don't know that at 5 years I'll still be here. I'm hoping to retire at 65. But I'll do this as long as there's still a need, as long as Mr. Rose still needs me to do it, and the company needs me to do it. I'll be here. I'm a company type guy, but as long as I still have customers too that appreciate it and want me to do it. So, that's it's wide open. It depends on what's going to happen and how they do things. Paint's lasting longer. You don't have to paint as often. But hell, people are still banging up walls, so there are still interior painting going to need to be done. But it's just a product out there now that Stowe came up with. It's a coating, it's Stowe Lotus on that. When you apply it on the building and the building it rains, it washes the dirt off the building. And they have found out now that they've been into with that product for a long time, the longer that product's on the building, the better it gets. So what used to be a 6 year turnaround on painting exteriors, this coating can push it to 8, 9 years. You know, and that helps. That helps the customer save money. Um, I've always been that I'm trying to build my relationships and build my customer base, but I'm also trying to take care of the customer as best as possible. And if I can save them some money, you know, um, on a project, knowing that maybe I put this Stowe Lotus on and I won't be able to paint you in 5 years, maybe 6 or 7 years, but hey, you get a better, longer lasting paint job. And I think by doing that, that's what helps with building customers, because customers know that I'm out there presenting them better solutions and longer term solutions, and not just worried about making the buck.
You're a teammate. You're
Right.
a part of a team. That's what you're trying to do. Exactly.
Exactly.
Great points. Great points. Brian, about out of time here. Thank you so much for taking the time to do the FM Corner. Hope everyone listens and picks up some pointers from someone that's been doing it for a really long time, done a really great job with it. And I truly appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And I'll kind of finish with you and Terry Byerly and I have an affinity for Sweet Home Alabama that most people don't understand. And none of us are from Alabama. But
No.
a lot of good times and stuff together. And certainly appreciate your time and speaking to our audience here on FM Corner today. So appreciate you. Thank you much.
I appreciate you having me on, Danny, and the best to you and your family. And I hope this new chapter in your life works out well. You're a hell of a man, and like I said, I've learned a lot from you, and I hope that you can continue to help other people like you helped me.
Sure. I will be glad to. Thank you so much for the kind words. That's our episode today. Again, thanks to Windy City Equipment for their sponsorship of our program, and we look forward to speaking with you the next time. Thank you.